So tomorrow, Canada has their federal election to elect the Prime Minister following the resignation of Justin Trudeau late last year. And if you recall, the pattern was that late in 2024, especially prior to his resignation, but all through December as well, the Conservative Party in Canada held a really big lead in the polls, upwards of 20 points, 25 points are mentioned. It seemed certain they would be elected in this election. However, that was when Trump was winning the election in the US, but he didn't enter office as president until late January, and very quickly he started to attack Canada or diminish, insult Canada in various ways, such as suggesting they should become the 51st state, that they were taking advantage of the US, many other insults. And around when that happened, the trajectory immediately went the other way. Now, of course, in between, Carney became the prime minister temporarily, taking over for Trudeau, and then an election was called for, was announced, and his goal is to be elected as the leader to replace Trudeau, and then Pierre Poilievre, his role is to try to take over and get rid of the Liberals. And the thing is, the polls, the public opinion shifted dramatically to the point that in recent weeks there's an expectation not only will Carney win, but that he will win with a majority of the seats in the parliament. And when you look at the astrology, it's fascinating to see that Poilievre is a Gemini, like Trump and many other Geminis in the political scene these years. And I will say here that his chart is a bit of a problem in that I don't have a birth time, I just know the birth day. So everything I'm saying is based on his day chart positions, which nonetheless reveal really significant information. But there is that possibility that the birth time could provide a horizon line or a culmination, midheaven line, something to possibly totally upturn what I'm about to say here. I doubt it, but it's a possibility that has to be left on the table, because charts with birth times, when someone is seeking something this big, it's super important. Much less so when a person is doing an individual chart. Sometimes I'm asked if a birth time is needed. Not necessarily. You can get great information without the birth time. Birth time is preferable, but if you don't have it, a good astrologer can still give you really, really good guidance. But in the case of two people running for a major title or a major position such as this, and especially in current democracies, margins tend to be quite tight, even when polls appear to be pointing in one direction or the other. And indeed, that's another factor that we're seeing in the Canadian election, that the polls have tightened quite a bit in recent days, as now people, well, you could say they're ready to vote. Many of them have voted already, but nevertheless, there's still more voting to be carried out, and the polls are tightening. So given that, if you don't have all the data available, there's some risk you can get it wrong. But with what I see, Polivier, he's Gemini on the earlier side, such that back in November, Jupiter was directly over his Sun, and he was riding high. Everything looked on track for victory. But then Trump comes in and changes the situation pretty dramatically because, well, you could say because Canadians became angry at the US and probably intuited or decided to intuit. I have no idea on that level. I mean, it's public opinion, but the main point is he decided to focus on the liberal side. And in a way, this is not totally unexpected because if you remember my recent collaboration with Lena, she mentioned that the same thing happened in Australia. They were ready to elect a conservative, which is something that has been happening throughout the world in various ways. But now they've also switched their allegiance or their intention to instead focus on the liberal, which in a sense becomes part of the resistance that is happening in the world toward this rightward movement. And in this sense, I'm guessing that Trump is probably not helping that rightward movement because the erratic behavior in the US, the often lawlessness and so forth, probably scares people for good reason. You know, they're seeing, right up front the consequences. So this is probably why it's happening. In any case, Polivier had the strong Jupiter. Still does in the sense that Jupiter is still in Gemini. Not for too much longer. It'll be leaving in June, but it's still there. Now past his last Gemini planet, a little further along, but it is in his sign. Now the thing about it too, though, is that in his chart, even without a time, you know his moon is in Virgo, and it's either being directly challenged by Saturn. That wouldn't be good. The later he is born in the day, the more the Saturn opposes it from Pisces. That is a definite red light signal, for sure, in terms of his chances. And in the meantime, when you look at Carney, first glance, you think, this looks complicated because he has a cluster of planets in Pisces, a cluster of planets in Virgo, opposing each other, and Saturn is in a major trigger to all of that because Saturn is going through there. In fact, he's Pisces near the end of the sign. Saturn is near the end of the sign. So there's definitely Saturn energy on the scene. And again, at first glance, you might say, this would probably be much better for Polivier. I mean, at least he has the Jupiter on his Sun sign. But there's the matter that it is known that public opinion has shifted. Plus, there are all kinds of indicators, other indicators, let's call them that, in Carney's chart that point to this being a very, very special moment in his trajectory, in his fate, because given where the progressed sun is, the progressed sun is the sun you gather from measuring days after your birth. And to give you an example of how powerful this can be, Trump had his progressed sun on the ascendant when he was elected in 2016. It's a kind of big coming together, big energy. You know, the sun on the ascendant line really highlights your personality. It's a very positive, just about always, not always. There are never, always is the wrong word to use in astrology because there are always exceptions, but by and large, it's really good. So that's exactly where it is for Carney as well. And moreover, not only is it there because he's 60 years old, which is 60 is in progression will equate to the sextile, which is a sixth of the circle. It's a very supportive aspect to his sun degree. So it's really, really good. Also, it's suspicious to see the north node, the traveling nodes. The north node is right on his sun now as well, because it happens to be at 25 degrees Pisces. And he has the kind of chart that really offsets those oppositions because he has a really, really strong Jupiter. He has like another opposition of planets, Jupiter and Neptune, that support this cluster of planets in Pisces and Virgo. So basically, my sense of it is that when I look at the whole picture, I put together the transits, progressions, and what I can gather from Polivier's chart. One more thing I didn't mention too in Carney's chart, because his time is to the minute. He's born way north, Canada. I think it's called Fort Worth, 60 degrees north, way up there. But when you have an exact time, you can progress the ascendant. And if you don't have an exact time, that progressed ascendant, it moves so quickly, you're going to be way out in left field in terms of pointing to anything precise. But if you have the time, that's one factor that can really give you information. And that ascendant is in a perfect spot for Carney in terms of right now, meaning this year, let's say, right? So my sense is that Carney is the more likely to win this election, although there is some possibility that the projected majority may not turn out and he may only get a minority. That, it's hard to know from the astrology. But my sense is that it tilts in his direction, even though I will admit that if I had no context to work with here, no other information, and I'm looking at just two charts that someone shows me, especially because one of them I don't have the birth time, it would be a pretty tough call. It would be potentially even, although I'm guessing that I probably would still tilt to Carney because of these really unusual connections that are taking place. One that I didn't mention, for example, another one is that he happens to have a very strong Uranus in the chart, and right now it's right on his ascendant. You have to realize a planet like that has an 84-year cycle. It goes through your ascendant if you live long enough to see it, because it's an 84-year cycle. If it happens really, really late in your life, you may not see this particular aspect, right? So for him, it comes now, and that's a big surge of individuation, energy. Uranus has a quality of bringing you into your unique role in life, so to speak. It's very powerful that way. Plus, one other factor with that Uranus, in the progression scheme, it's now between age 60 and 64. It's super strong because it's making its progress station. It's been progressed retrograde during the first 60 years of his life. At age 62, goes direct and goes the other way. These kinds of progressions can be very powerful in showing you a really important moment in a person's chart. This was, for example, the case for Biden in 2020. He had really obvious progressions that were bringing him into the presidency. Now, as far as the U.S., my feeling is this also fits into the downturn that we've seen for the current president. It all seems to be coming up snake eyes for him lately. All kinds of negative results, because the Jupiter energy in his chart, even though right now it's roaming around the sun and moon, and possibly he may get some somewhat decent results on some things, not sure what, to tell you the truth, because he constantly misuses this planet by playing it to the arrogant, over-expansive, overconfident side. But even so, maybe he gets some result on some level. But this one is a big one because it goes to the bigger pattern in his chart that you see extending into the far longer future, where, partly because he set it up this way, by the way, he went out of his way to hurt and even destroy friendships, alliances. So then there you point much more to the Saturn and Uranus patterns in his chart that suggest setbacks, due to people that could be your friends but become your enemies or become opponents. Let's call them that. And so, to me, this fits that pattern in his own chart. And as far as America is concerned, well, obviously this is not good for the U.S. in the larger sense because losing friends, and Canada is our best friend. They're next door. This is nuts. What Trump has done here is completely nuts, in my opinion. It's the most short-sighted, most ignorant move, although he's the champion of making boneheaded moves pretty much on a daily basis. But nevertheless, this is particularly bad. And so in that sense, it's bad for the U.S., bad for all of us. But it's also bad for all of us that he's pursuing a tariff policy that he says is going to make America richer. And quite honestly, in my sense, is that it's going to make America poorer. This is like when he was running casinos and bankrupting them. And how do you bankrupt a casino when the house always wins? You have to be really kind of out to lunch, to engineer those kinds of negative outcomes. So now he's translated into the way he's managing the country. And so from the vantage point of the overall picture, that's not good. On the other hand, to the extent that you are focused on the resistance to what the GOP and Trump are trying to do, to the whole Trumpism movement, this may be a good thing, because if you have Canada determined to hold their ground and oppose the U.S., it becomes yet another problem for Trump to deal with. And the thing is, on the one hand, you'd say he himself, Trump, is showing you the problem with having too many open fronts, starting wars and attacking everyone all at once. Not a good idea. But the fact that he's doing it, and the fact that it's resulting in this way, and the fact that almost certainly leads him into failure, is good from the perspective of those who don't want him to succeed, plain and simple. And thing is, all of this said, you can also see in Carney's chart, and in that sense it mirrors Trump's, because those late degrees of Pisces are where both Saturn and Neptune are going to still do a major revisit between fall and spring, fall of 25, spring of 26. And this suggests, which I've said in other videos plenty of times, lots of trouble for our president, but it's not going to be easy for Carney either. And most likely it's because then he's about 6 months into his tenure. Practically every democracy, the people are always relatively fickle. If they don't see results within 6 months, approval starts to drop. And you can say it's great that Canada is resisting. They should resist. They're a proud country. Of course they should resist. But that doesn't mean the economy is going to be doing well because of what Trump has done. Having these tariffs imposed is really hard on the American economy. Now they're looking to make friends with other countries, establish new trade routes and everything, but that takes time. And so you can probably expect a rough time for Carney between October and the spring of 2026. Once Saturn goes into Aries permanently, that's better. That's quite a bit better for the chart, but it'll still take quite a while because separately, Canada is a Cancer country like the US, which is why, by the way, Saturn, if you recall a video that I made in which I said Saturn in cardinal signs, Aries is one of them, both countries are Cancer, you get a square. So those years I showed how for a whole century plus, like century and a quarter, there's a repeated pattern in the US chart where times become more difficult, recessions, contractions, which is what Saturn rules. Well, this is applied to Canada also during 26 and 27 into the spring of 28, whereupon Saturn finally leaves Aries. It's just that Neptune, though, remains in Aries still for quite some time because Neptune is a lot slower. So some of this is going to get extended beyond the next major U.S. election, but in the near term, Saturn is affecting both countries, and it therefore correlates more with contraction than with expansion, definitely. In the short term, actually, something that helps both countries. It's just that I'm trying to figure out how it's going to show up in the U.S. in the sense that all of this is happening, and we do have Jupiter in Cancer coming up between June of 25 and June of 26. So that, because both countries are Cancer, that's an upsurge of confidence. I can see how that would be good for Canadians, keep them, even if they're turning somewhat against the leader and so forth, still keep them at least focused on national pride. In the U.S., for now, the only visibility I have and that I could hypothesize, or that I could look at to hypothesize, would be that at least part of the country, in this country, will remain engaged and believing, in some sense, in the GOP agenda, and maybe the other half is enthused by the resistance. I don't know. It gets a little bit hard to explain the Jupiter in Cancer for the U.S. Possibly as I look a little more, I'll get more of an intuition as to how it'll manifest. But I don't think that overrides the Saturn enough to eliminate the contracted feeling that we're all likely to feel, because that's the stronger cycle for sure. Even though Jupiter is the bigger planet, Saturn is big enough and rules the more weighty issues. And I've noticed in personal charts as well that between Saturn and Jupiter, usually Saturn will get the upper hand in terms of determining how things are going. And if it's giving you a rough time, it's difficult for the Jupiter to overcome it. Anyway, that's all I have for now. One final thing is that even in the rapid moving situation tomorrow, the moon is in Taurus, and it's a new moon, but the moon position around the time when they're likely to announce the results in Canada is right on Carney's ascendant, which is another plus in terms of pointing it in his direction. All right, there you have it. That's all for now.